The bus stopped at the edge of the long gravel road and Mary stepped down slowly, clutching her small brown bag against her chest. The morning sun was pale, not warm enough to chase away the chill in the air. She looked up at the house ahead, tall, white, and perfect. Standing alone like a proud statue in the middle of green fields, Mary had never seen a house so big, so clean, so silent, she whispered to herself. This is where I'll work now, and started walking, her old shoes crunching on the stones. Each step felt heavy, not from the bag, but from the fear she tried to hide. She needed this job badly. Her mother was sick back home, her younger brothers still in school, and the small jobs she used to get in town were not enough. When she saw the ad for a maid at the White family mansion, she thought maybe this was her chance to start again, but now, looking at the tall iron gates and the long shadows under the trees, she wasn't so sure. As she reached the gate, it opened before she could touch it. A man in a dark suit stood there, thin and quiet, his face without a smile. "You must be the new maid," he said, not looking her in the eyes. "Yes, sir. I'm Mary," she answered softly. He nodded and pointed toward the front door. "Mrs. White is waiting." The big door opened before she even knocked, and a woman with pale skin and sharp eyes appeared. Her white dress matched the house. "Clean and cold. You're late," she said, though Mary knew she was early. "I'm sorry, ma'am. The bus." "Excuses are for lazy people," Mrs. White cut her off. "Come in." Mary stepped inside, and her breath caught. The house shone like glass. Polished floors, gold-framed mirrors, and walls so white they almost hurt her eyes. A sweet, heavy smell of flowers filled the air, mixed with something else, something metallic and strange. Mrs. White walked ahead, her heels clicking like small hammers on the marble floor. "You will clean every morning before breakfast, dust the living room, mop the hallways, and polish the silverware," she said without turning. "You'll have your meals in the kitchen." "Not with us," Mary nodded quickly. "Yes, ma'am." As they passed the staircase, Mary saw two children peeking from above. A girl maybe 16 with long blonde hair, and a boy a little younger. They whispered to each other, then giggled. Mary smiled politely, trying to be friendly. But the girl's eyes were full of something sharp. Not curiosity, something darker. "Those are my children. Clara and Simon," Mrs. White said coldly. "They don't like noise, so stay out of their way." Mary followed her to the kitchen. It was large and spotless, every pot shining like silver. "This is where you'll work," Mrs. White said. "And that door over there leads to the basement. Never go there." Her voice turned colder than before. Mary looked toward the door, old wooden and painted white like the rest of the house. "Yes, ma'am," she whispered. Mrs. White's face softened for a moment, but her eyes didn't. Then she left, leaving Mary alone with the quiet. Mary unpacked her things, a small Bible, 2 dresses and a picture of her family. She placed them neatly in the tiny servant's room behind the kitchen. When she began cleaning, she felt the house watching her. The mirrors reflected her from every side. The ticking of a faraway clock echoed like footsteps. She tried to hum a tune to calm herself, but her voice sounded too loud at one point. She saw something move behind her in the reflection. When she turned, there was nothing, only the white hallway stretching endlessly. Hours passed and she worked until her arms ached. As she dusted the staircase, she felt someone staring again. She looked up. Clara stood there, the teenage daughter, watching silently. Her smile was small and strange. "Do you like cleaning?" Clara asked in a soft, mocking tone. "Yes, miss," Mary said politely. "I'm used to it." Clara tilted her head, her smile growing. "Good, because this house never stays clean for long." Then she turned and walked away, her laughter echoing down the hall. Mary frowned, unsure what the girl meant. She picked up her mop again and started cleaning near the basement door. Her hand brushed the doorknob by accident and it felt cold. Colder than metal should be. At that moment she heard a voice behind her. Deep and calm, it was the man in the suit standing still. "Mrs. White said not to go near that door," he said. His tone carried no emotion, only warning. Mary nodded quickly. "I'm sorry, sir." He turned away, but before he left, he added quietly, "People who open that door never come back the same." Mary froze. Her heart thumping, she looked at the white door again, plain. Quiet, harmless, but now it seemed to hum faintly, like something breathing on the other side. She stepped back, clutching her mop tightly. And for the first time she wondered what kind of house she had entered. The wind howled outside, the sky darkened. And from deep below the floor, it almost sounded like someone sighed softly, calling her name. Mary tried to forget the warning about the basement, but the words stayed in her mind like a splinter under the skin. Every time she passed that door, her eyes went to it without meaning to. It looked so ordinary. White paint, shiny handle. Nothing strange. Yet something about it made her heart beat faster. She told herself she was being silly, that rich people always had rules like that. Maybe it was where they kept expensive wine, or old furniture, or something they didn't want the maid to touch. But still, at night when the house went quiet, she could almost hear a faint sound from down there, a soft tapping like someone moving slowly in the dark. Days went by and Mary settled into her routine. She woke before dawn, cleaned every room and stayed out of sight whenever the family passed. Mrs. White never smiled. Mr. White hardly spoke. And the children always watched her like she was something strange sometimes. Clara would whisper to her brother and laugh when Mary looked their way. Mary didn't answer back. She needed the job too much. The mansion was beautiful but lonely, and Mary often felt like she was cleaning a tomb, not a home. One evening, as she wiped the hallway mirrors, she saw a flicker of light behind her. She turned. It came from under the basement door, a soft glow moving like a candle flame. She froze, her cloth dropping to the floor. At first she thought maybe someone was down there, but everyone else was upstairs eating dinner. Then she heard it, a low, shaky sound like crying. It was faint but clear, the kind of cry that came from someone trying not to be heard. Her heart began to race. Maybe someone was hurt. Maybe a child had fallen or someone was locked inside. She took a step closer, whispering, "Hello? Is someone there?" The crying stopped. The silence that followed was thick and heavy. Mary reached out and touched the doorknob. It was ice cold, even though the rest of the house was warm. Her fingers trembled, but she started to turn it anyway. Slowly, carefully. Just then she felt something behind her. A cold hand grabbed her wrist hard. She gasped and turned around. Mrs. White stood there, her face pale, her eyes burning with anger. "I told you never to go near this door," she hissed. Mary stammered, "I'm sorry, ma'am. I thought I heard someone crying." "You heard nothing." Mrs. White cut her off sharply. "Do not lie to me." Her grip tightened until Mary winced. "I wasn't lying, ma'am, I swear. There was—" Mrs. White leaned closer, her voice low and sharp as a knife. "You will not speak of this again," she said. "Not to anyone." Her lips trembled, but her eyes stayed cold. Then, just as suddenly, she let go and smoothed her dress. Her tone turned calm again. Too calm. "Go to your room, Mary. It's late." Mary obeyed, clutching her hand where Mrs. White had held her. In her small room, she sat on the edge of her bed, shaking. She could still feel the chill of that hand and hear the faint echo of the crying. What was in that basement? Why did Mrs. White get so angry? And why did that doorknob feel like ice when the rest of the house was warm? She couldn't stop thinking about it. Even as she tried to sleep, the storm outside grew stronger, rain hitting the windows like fingers tapping on the glass. Mary pulled her blanket tight and whispered a prayer under her breath. Around midnight, she woke suddenly. The lamp in her room flickered, though there was no wind inside. She thought she heard something again, a soft sound. Not from her room, but from far below. The same crying, gentle, sad, lonely. She sat frozen, afraid to move. Then, as quickly as it started, it stopped. Only silence remained. Mary waited, holding her breath, and in that silence, she realized something strange. The sound hadn't come through the floor. It had come through the walls the next morning. Mrs. White acted as if nothing had happened. She smiled faintly at breakfast, her voice polite, calm, controlled. Mr. White read his newspaper without looking up. The children laughed as if the night had been peaceful. Mary cleaned quietly, pretending to, but inside, her mind kept spinning. She remembered the warning from the man in the suit. People who open that door never come back the same. She now wondered if he had meant it as a threat or as a warning. Either way, she knew one thing for sure. The house was hiding something, and the basement was at the center of it. As she dusted the mirrors again, she thought she saw something move behind her reflection, a shadow where there shouldn't be one. When she turned around, there was nothing there. But faintly, just faintly from under the floor, came the sound of someone whispering her name, Mary. The morning after the strange night, Mary moved slowly through the house, her eyes heavy from lack of sleep. She couldn't stop thinking about the sound she had heard. that soft crying that had floated through the walls. Every time she blinked, she saw the faint glow under the basement door and Mrs. White's cold face appearing out of the shadows. She wanted to believe she had imagined it, that maybe the storm had played tricks on her, but deep down, she knew it was real. The mansion looked peaceful in the daylight, yet everything felt wrong. The mirrors shone too brightly, the hallways stretched too long, and the silence between rooms was too deep. Mary tried to hum to herself while sweeping, but even her voice seemed to fade before it could fill the air. Sometimes she thought she heard footsteps behind her, but whenever she turned around, no one was there. The only sound was the steady ticking of the clock in the hallway, slow and heavy like a heartbeat. Later that day, while polishing the silverware, Mary heard a faint whisper. At first, she thought it came from the open window, but then it came again, clearer this time, right beside her ear. "Mary!" She jumped, dropping a fork that clattered loudly against the floor. Her heart raced as she looked around. No one was there. She rubbed her arms, feeling the tiny hairs rise on her skin. Maybe it was the wind, she told herself. Maybe the pipes. But deep down, she knew it wasn't. When she carried the cleaned dishes to the dining room, she noticed something strange. The air in the room was colder than before, and in one corner near the large portrait of the family, she thought she saw a faint shadow move. It was gone in a blink, but it left behind a soft echo of a sigh. Mary tried to ignore it, but her hands were shaking as she set down the dishes. That evening, while mopping the hallway, she found muddy footprints near the basement door. They were small, like a woman's feet, and led only one way, out from the door, not in. Her breath caught. No one had gone down there, not since the warning. She knelt and touched one of the prints. It was damp and cold, as if made only moments ago. She looked around, but the hallway was empty. Still, she felt the air shift, like someone had just passed behind her. The rest of the day passed in uneasy silence. Clara and Simon, the children, watched her more than usual, whispering and giggling whenever she looked their way. In the afternoon, as she dusted the living room shelves, Clara walked in, smiling that same sharp smile. "You look tired, Mary," she said sweetly. "I'm fine, miss," Mary replied, trying to sound calm. Clara tilted her head and ran a finger along the dusty table. "You know what happened to the last maid?" she asked suddenly. Mary froze. "No, miss, I don't." Clara leaned closer, her voice dropping to a whisper. "She tried to wash away what can't be cleaned." Then she laughed softly and walked away, leaving the words hanging in the air like smoke. Mary's chest tightened. She wanted to ask what Clara meant, but something in the girl's eyes had stopped her. The look wasn't just cruel, it was knowing, as if Clara had seen something Mary hadn't. As the sun began to set, Mary's unease grew heavier. The house seemed to breathe with the night, creaks, sighs, whispers, all blending into a strange rhythm. When she walked by the mirrors, her reflection seemed a moment too slow to follow, and once, just once, she thought she saw another face behind her own, darker, older, sad. Later, as she sat in her small room eating her dinner, she heard quiet tapping on the wall. 3 soft knocks, then silence. Her spoon froze halfway to her mouth. After a few seconds, 3 more taps came, slow and careful. She whispered, "Who's there?" No answer. Only the faintest whisper that sounded like her name again. She pressed her ear to the wall and her heart thudded faster. It sounded like someone breathing. Not loudly, but close, too close. She pulled away quickly, clutching her blanket. Her mind was full of questions, but there were no answers here, only shadows. When she finally lay down, she couldn't sleep. The ticking clock sounded louder than ever. The walls seemed to hum as if they were alive. Mary turned toward the picture of her family beside the bed and whispered, "Mama, I'm scared." Her eyes filled with tears. She wanted to leave, but she had nowhere to go. No money to start again. She closed her eyes, trying to calm herself. But just as she began to drift into uneasy sleep, a cold breath touched her ear, and a voice whispered, "Don't go near the basement again. She's not finished cleaning down there." The morning sun came through the tall windows, soft and golden. but it did little to warm the cold feeling inside Mary's heart. She was still shaken from the strange whisper the night before, the one that had breathed so close to her ear. She told herself it was a dream, but deep down she knew it wasn't. The house had too many secrets, too many shadows that moved when no one was looking. Still, she tried to act normal, cleaning each room carefully, forcing herself not to think about the voice while dusting the study. She noticed something she hadn't seen before, a small wooden drawer built into the side of a tall bookshelf. It looked old, the handle rusty, and when she pulled it open, it made a dry, creaking sound. Inside there were papers, old letters tied with ribbon, and beneath them, an old photograph. She lifted it gently, brushing off the dust. Her breath caught in her throat when she saw it. The photo showed the same family, Mr. and Mrs. White, much younger, standing in front of the house. Between them stood a black woman in a maid's uniform, smiling shyly. Her hands were folded in front of her apron, and her eyes looked kind but tired. Mary stared at her face for a long time, feeling something strange, a sense of sadness, of connection. The woman looked a little like her, not exactly, but enough to make her heart ache. She turned the photo over and saw words written in neat handwriting. Ruth, gone but never forgotten. Mary whispered the name softly. Ruth, and felt a chill run down her back. Suddenly, the air in the room seemed to grow colder. She looked up and saw the curtain move, though the window was closed. The door behind her creaked open slowly. Mary turned quickly, clutching the photo to her chest. Mr. White stood there, tall and serious. His face calm but his eyes sharp. He smiled, but it was the kind of smile that never reached the eyes. You like looking into things that aren't yours, Mary? He asked quietly. Mary's hands trembled. I'm sorry, sir, I didn't mean to. He stepped closer, his shoes tapping softly on the floor. You didn't mean to, he repeated, his voice slow. Then he stopped just a few steps away and looked at the photo in her hands. Where did you find that? He asked, his tone now harder, colder. In the drawer, sir, she said quickly. I was just cleaning. He took the photograph from her hand without warning, his fingers brushing hers, cold and dry. This doesn't belong to you, he said flatly, slipping it into his pocket. Mary lowered her head, her heart pounding fast. I'm sorry, sir, I didn't mean any harm. Mr. White looked at her for a long time, his expression unreadable. Finally, he said, Ruth was our maid. A long time ago. There was something strange in the way he said her name, like it hurt him to speak it. She left, he added quickly, just like everyone else who couldn't follow the rules. His eyes flicked toward the basement door visible down the hall. Mary noticed it, and so did he. Don't go near that door, Mary, he said again, his voice low and sharp. You won't like what you find. He turned and walked away, his footsteps echoing down the hallway. Mary stood frozen for a moment. Staring after him when he was gone, she whispered, Left? But somehow the word didn't sound right. Something in her heart told her Ruth hadn't left at all. As the day went on, Mary couldn't stop thinking about the photograph. She imagined the woman named Ruth working in the same rooms, scrubbing the same floors. Had she also heard whispers in the walls? Had she also been warned to stay away from the basement? Maybe Ruth had gone down there one night. Just like Mary almost did, maybe she had never come back. Later, while sweeping the hall, Clara appeared again, her usual sly smile curling on her lips. You've been looking through our things, she said softly. Mary froze, the broom shaking in her hand. Clara giggled. Don't worry, I don't care. But Mother does. Mary tried to smile. I was just cleaning. Miss Clara leaned closer and whispered. Ruth said the same thing before she disappeared. Then she turned and walked away, her laughter floating through the empty hall like music from a dream. Mary stood there alone, her hands cold, her heart full of dread. Every sound in the house suddenly felt louder. The ticking clock, the wind outside, the faint hum beneath the floorboards. She wanted to leave, to run far away, but she needed the money. And she didn't want to believe that something truly evil was happening here. Still, as she went back to her small room that night, she couldn't shake the image of Ruth's smile. It was kind, but behind it there was fear. And as Mary blew out her candle, she thought she heard a whisper again, so soft it almost sounded like her own breath. Don't let them bury you too, Mary. The rain started before evening, soft at first, then turning into a storm that shook the whole house. The wind howled through the tall trees outside, and thunder rolled across the sky like an angry drum. Mary stood at the kitchen window, watching the rain hit the glass and slide down in long silver lines. She had never liked storms, but this one felt different, darker, heavier, almost alive. The lights flickered once, then steadied again, and she thought she heard a faint sound under the thunder, a low humming. It came from the basement, deep and soft, like someone singing far away. Mrs. White came into the kitchen, calm as always, her white dress spotless even in the storm. "You will stay here tonight," she said, not asking, only ordering. "The roads are flooded. No one can leave," Mary nodded quietly. "Yes, ma'am." Though her stomach turned at the thought of spending the night in that house, Mrs. White left without another word, and the house grew silent again except for the rain and thunder. Mary sat near the stove, trying to keep warm, the flickering fire casting strange shadows on the walls. As the night deepened, the sound from below grew louder. It wasn't just humming anymore. It was like someone crying softly, then whispering between sobs. Mary stood still, her hands trembling. The sound pulled at her. Like invisible fingers calling her name, she whispered to herself. It's just the wind, but she didn't believe it. The voice was too real, too human, too sad around midnight. The lights flickered again, and this time they went out completely. The house fell into darkness, broken only by flashes of lightning. Mary grabbed a candle and lit it with shaking hands. The flame flickered wildly, throwing long, moving shadows across the room. Every creak of the house made her jump. She could still hear the crying, clearer now, and it was definitely coming from the basement. She took a deep breath, holding the candle in front of her, and walked slowly toward the hallway. Each step echoed on the wooden floor, mixing with the sound of rain hitting the roof. When she reached the basement door, she hesitated. She remembered Mrs. White's warning, Mr. White's cold stare, the man in the suit telling her that people never came back the same. But the crying sounded so desperate now, like a child lost in the dark. Mary couldn't walk away, not if someone needed help. Her heart was beating so fast it almost hurt. She whispered, "Hello? Is someone down there?" No answer, only the same soft crying. She reached for the doorknob, cold as ice. Just like before, she turned it slowly, and the door opened with a long, low creak. A wave of cold, damp air rose up from below, smelling of earth and something metallic like rust or blood. Her candle flickered, almost going out. She stepped forward, one foot on the wooden stairs, the other still on the floor above. "Hello?" She called again, her voice shaking. Then she heard it. A whisper so close it felt like someone was breathing against her ear. "Help me, Ruth," it said. Mary froze, her blood turning to ice. The name hit her like a slap. Ruth, the maid in the photo, the woman who had disappeared. Her hands trembled so much the candle wax dripped onto her fingers, but she didn't even feel it. She looked down into the darkness below, but she couldn't see anything except shadows and the faint outline of the stairs. "Who's there?" she whispered again, her voice barely a breath. There was no reply this time, just silence, and then, slowly, a sound like something dragging across the floor. It was faint but steady, like someone pulling heavy chains. Mary's heart pounded harder. She wanted to run, to close the door and forget what she heard, but her feet wouldn't move. She felt trapped between fear and curiosity, like a moth staring into a flame. Lightning flashed through the windows, lighting the hall for a split second. In that flash, she thought she saw a shape at the bottom of the stairs. Small, bent, moving slightly. Her breath caught and she stepped back quickly. Her candle nearly falling, the thunder crashed again. And when the light returned, the shape was gone. Only the darkness stared back at her, thick and silent. Suddenly, a cold wind blew up from the basement, strong enough to blow out her candle. Mary screamed, stumbling backward. The door slammed shut with a loud bang, echoing through the house. Her heart was racing so fast she could barely breathe. She stood there in the dark hallway, her hands shaking, tears in her eyes. From behind the closed door came one last whisper, soft but clear. "Don't leave me here again." Mary ran back to her room, locking the door and pressing her back against it. The candle was gone, and only flashes of lightning lit the room. She sat on the floor, hugging her knees, her breath quick and shallow. The sound of the rain outside felt like 1,000 fingers tapping on the windows. But the only thing she could hear in her mind was that voice. The way it had said Ruth, the way it had sounded so sad, so alive, and she knew deep in her heart that someone, or something, was waiting for her down there, and it was not done calling her name. Mary could not sleep after what happened that night. The storm still raged outside, thunder shaking the windows, rain pouring like endless tears. She sat in her bed, holding the candle that had gone out, staring at the dark crack under her door. Every sound in the house seemed louder. The ticking clock, the dripping water, the faint wind through the cracks. And beneath it all, she could still hear that faint humming from the basement. Slow and steady like a heartbeat, the voice had called her name, and now, even in silence, it echoed in her mind. When morning came, the rain had stopped, but the world outside was gray and cold. Mary went to the kitchen to start her work, pretending everything was normal, but nothing felt normal anymore. She noticed the muddy footprints she had seen before. They were gone, wiped away completely. The basement door looked freshly polished, as if someone had cleaned it during the night. Mrs. White sat at the breakfast table, her hands folded neatly, her face calm. "Did you sleep well?" she asked without looking up. Mary forced a small smile. "Yes, ma'am." Mrs. White's lips curved into a small, cold grin. "Good, we don't like noise here." After breakfast, Mr. White called her into the study. He was sitting behind his desk, his face hidden behind the newspaper when she stepped in. He lowered it slowly. "Mary," he said, his voice deep and even, "you've been here for weeks now." "Yes, sir," she said quietly. "I'm grateful for the job." He nodded but didn't smile. "Then you should remember the rules," he said softly, "especially the one about the basement." Mary's throat went dry. She wanted to say something, to ask about the voice she heard, but before she could, he leaned forward, his eyes sharp as glass. "Some things in this house are better left alone," he whispered. "Do you understand?" She nodded quickly. "Yes, sir." "Good," he said, his smile returning. But it wasn't warm. It was the kind of smile that hides danger. When he dismissed her, Mary went back to cleaning, but she couldn't stop thinking about the basement. Every time she passed the hallway, she could almost feel the air grow colder. That door seemed to call to her in silence. She wanted to believe she was imagining it, but deep down she knew she wasn't. Later that evening, as the family sat in the living room, Mary heard a strange sound, a low thud like something heavy falling from below. She looked toward the basement door. It was slightly open. Just an inch. Her heart began to race. She glanced toward Mrs. White, but the woman's face showed no surprise, no concern. It was as if she hadn't heard it at all. Mary took a slow step closer, drawn by fear and curiosity mixed together. The air around the basement door was freezing. She pushed it open wider and looked down the stairs. The light was dim, but she could see the outline of something in the corner. A pile of old rags, maybe, or a broken chair. She hesitated, then grabbed a lantern from the shelf and lit it. Her hands were shaking so much that the flame flickered. Step by step, she walked down the stairs, each board creaking under her feet. The smell of damp earth filled her nose, thick and heavy. When she reached the bottom, she lifted the lantern higher. What she saw made her knees go weak. In the corner wasn't a pile of rags. It was a bundle of bones wrapped in cloth. The cloth was old and torn, stained dark with age. A necklace hung from one of the bones, simple and silver. Mary gasped and dropped the lantern, the light swinging wildly. The flame almost went out, and for a moment, she stood frozen, staring. The air felt alive, whispering softly, and then she heard a voice. Not a whisper this time, but a voice clear and broken. "Why didn't they let me go, Mary?" Mary screamed, stepping backward. The lantern slipping from her hands, it hit the floor, sparks flying as the small flame flickered dangerously close to the old rags. Suddenly she heard footsteps behind her. Slow, calm, heavy. She turned, and at the top of the stairs stood Mrs. White. Her pale face glowing in the weak light. Mr. White and the children stood beside her, silent, watching. Mary's voice shook. "There's someone down here. There are bones." Mrs. White's cold eyes met hers. "You should have never come down here," she said quietly. Mary took a step back, her foot slipping on the dirt. "Who is she?" Mary cried, "Who's Ruth?" Mrs. White's face didn't change, but her voice turned soft and strange. "Ruth was family," she said. "She disobeyed. Like you." Mr. White stepped forward now, his voice calm. "We gave her a home, food, safety, and she betrayed our kindness." Mary shook her head, her tears falling. "You killed her." Mrs. White smiled sadly. "We cleaned the mess, Mary." The air grew colder, and the lights began to flicker again from behind Mary. She heard the soft humming again, the same song from that first night, and this time she realized it wasn't coming from the walls. It was coming from the bones. Mrs. White stepped closer, her eyes dark and empty. "We can't let you leave now," she whispered. The candlelight shook, the house groaned, and Mary screamed. Her voice echoed through the basement, but no one outside the mansion would ever hear it. Above her, the door slammed shut with a heavy sound, and in the dark, the humming grew louder, until it drowned out everything else. The next morning, the sun rose quietly over the white mansion. The storm had passed, and everything outside looked clean and calm. The trees sparkled with drops of rain, and birds sang as if the world had never known darkness. But inside the house, the silence was heavy, thick like fog. Mrs. White stood by the window, sipping her tea, her face calm and pale as always. Mr. White read his newspaper, not looking up once. Clara and Simon ate their breakfast quietly, glancing at each other now and then with knowing eyes. No one mentioned Mary. No one even asked where she was. The smell of cleaning soap hung in the air. Stronger than usual, the floor shone brighter. The silverware gleamed, and the whole house looked almost too perfect. It was as if someone had spent the whole night scrubbing and polishing every inch. Only one thing was strange. The basement door had been locked again, sealed tight with a new, shiny padlock. And on the kitchen counter lay a single item that didn't belong there. A silver necklace, dull with age, shaped like the one Ruth had worn in the photograph. By afternoon, a knock came at the door. A cheerful young woman stood outside, holding a small bag and smiling brightly. "Hello?" she said. "I'm the new maid." "Mrs. White hired me last week," Mrs. White smiled softly. "Ah yes, come in, dear." The girl stepped inside, her shoes squeaking slightly on the polished floor. "This house is beautiful," she said with a grin. "So big and quiet," Mrs. White nodded. "You'll find it peaceful here." Her eyes flickered toward the locked basement door for just a second, then back to the girl. "We value order and silence. As long as you follow the rules, you'll be just fine." The new maid, whose name was Sarah, nodded eagerly. She followed Mrs. White through the halls as she explained her duties. "Clean the floors every morning, polish the mirrors, dust the study, and keep the silver bright," Mrs. White said. "Yes, ma'am," Sarah replied happily. They stopped near the basement door, and Mrs. White's tone changed. "One more thing," she said, her voice soft but firm. "You must never go down there." Sarah blinked, a little confused. "The basement, ma'am?" Mrs. White smiled politely. "It's not safe. Old pipes, rotten wood. Do you understand?" Sarah nodded again. "Yes, ma'am." "Good," Mrs. White said with a satisfied smile. "You'll do well here." As Sarah started her work, the house seemed peaceful again. But when she walked through the hallway near the basement, she felt something strange. A chill ran down her arms, and for a moment she thought she heard someone humming softly. She looked around, but there was no one there. The air felt different, colder, heavier, and she thought she saw a faint shadow move across the floor. She shook her head quickly, telling herself she was just imagining things. After all, every new place takes time to get used to. Later that evening, as the sun began to set, the family gathered for dinner. Their laughter floated through the house, but it sounded hollow. Sarah was cleaning the kitchen when she noticed muddy footprints near the basement door. They were small, almost the size of a woman's feet. She frowned and bent down to wipe them. But when she touched the floor, the mud felt cold, almost wet. She looked up, and for a second, she thought she saw a faint handprint on the door. She blinked, and it was gone that night. The wind blew gently outside, and the house was quiet again. Sarah went to her small room, tired but content. She looked at the picture of her family on the bedside table and smiled. She didn't hear the soft footsteps in the hallway. She didn't see the shadow that passed her door, slow and silent. But she did wake up once, just for a moment, when she thought she heard someone whisper her name. "Sarah." The voice was soft, familiar, and full of sadness. It sounded almost like it came from under the floor. She sat up, listening, her heart beating fast. "Hello?" She called quietly, but there was no answer, only the sound of the wind. After a few seconds, she lay down again, pulling the blanket over herself, telling her heart to calm down. Down in the basement, the air was still. The lantern lay on the ground, its glass cracked. The old bones were gone now, buried somewhere deeper beneath the earth. But two names were whispered through the cold. Dark air, Ruth and Mary. Their voices were soft, almost peaceful, and sometimes when the house grew too quiet, the walls seemed to sigh with them. No matter how much the Whites cleaned or polished, no matter how bright the chandeliers shone, they could never wash away the stain that lived in those walls. the stain of cruelty, of hate, of silence. And as the new maid slept upstairs, the whispers rose again. Help us. Before it's your turn.